All right. Add myself here. All righty. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm speaking to the folks in the space and those of you on Zoom. We're just going to take a few seconds to rearrange ourselves here and move to a table so that our performers can sit around the table with one another and enter into conversation. So officially, good afternoon, bonjour et bienvenue from Concordia University's Fourth Space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At Fourth Space, we work with Concordians as well as their community partners to activate the various research projects in development, and often this results in a moment of connectivity via a live hybrid event such as today's. So welcome to Transgressive Sounds and Atmospheres, a unique research creation curatorial research project that explores ambience, atmospheres, and the transgressive nature of soundscapes. I'll just quickly note that we are streaming this event to YouTube and are running it as a meeting, as you've already noticed, so that you can turn on your cameras and jump into the conversation during the discussion period. To tell you more about this project and to introduce our special guest performers, it's my pleasure to pass proceedings over to Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Matthew Unger. Over to you, Matt.
Oh, you got that.
Almost ready.
Hi.
Yeah.
Okay, we're unmuted. Fantastic. I'm not used to being mic'd in a space like this. So hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to Hubert and Chantale for such a wonderful performance. It is really beautiful and evocative. What I'll do is first introduce the musicians, then I'll introduce myself and the project before we open the floor for conversation with each other and with the audience and the Zoom audience. So Hubert Gendron-Blais is an author, musician, and activist and researcher working at the confluence of philosophy, music, and politics, straining to hear and maybe transpose even social and aesthetic movements with particular attention to the concepts of affect and community, including the vibrant materiality of sound, sonic topology of politics, the effective resonance of collective assemblages. Amongst his projects include experimental instrumental group Si Ce Qui Nous Traverse. I'm sorry. I've been practicing that a lot and I still messed up. And the Devenir Ensemble, which is a sonic fieldwork and compository exploration of Montreal protest movements. Chantal Laplante. Her artistic practice consists of a long exploration of different genres involving instrumental, mixed, electro-acoustic music, and improvisation. It is in the context of her recently completed PhD work. Congratulations, by the way. It's a huge accomplishment. That she began reflecting more on listening practices. Her work places the body of the listener at the center of her devices as she seeks to offer a sensitive sonic experience anchored in the atmosphere of the place. I am Matthew Unger. I'm assistant professor in sociology and anthropology, as Anna has already mentioned, where I contribute to the Law and Society minor and teach social theory classes. My research has two predominant directions. One, socio-legal studies, studies in colonial governance, and patterns of criminalization and accusation derived from settler colonial contexts. The other direction I've had for a few years now is on extreme musics, after some time doing ethnographic work and theoretical work in the extreme metal communities. This new project takes inspiration from my Atmospheres working group through CISC. This is a new project, and Chantal and Uber have been very generous and have been very important interlocutors in the development of this project, and I have much appreciation for them. We've been trying to hold an event for a couple years now, which, like many artistic and in-person activities, has been delayed by COVID. So thanks to Anna and Doug at the Fourth Space for helping set up this event and this first event. And thank you to CISC and the Center for Sensory Studies for supporting this project along the way. Transgressive Sounds and Atmospheres is an ethnographic and curatorial project which aims to bring listeners into dialogue with musicians and composers to explore issues related to composition, listening practices, spatial and sonic soundscapes, and effective atmospheres. This is the first and inaugural event of the project, with a larger event to be held in the spring. Both this event and the larger one in the spring will be a chance to explore fascinating musics, often challenging musics, and to sit within intensive and contrasting listening experiences from sparse textured electro-acoustic musics, experimental acoustic musics, to more extreme forms of noise and extreme metal. There are two components to the overarching project itself. The first one is an ethnographic and curatorial component, where we invite participants to listen and dialogue with musicians and composers to encourage what my colleague David Howes and others have called sensory ethnography, whereby people attend to the sensory experiences of situations and spaces afforded by these sonic events. The second is to interrogate the normativity of our listening practices and our music-making practices to understand community conditions of judgment within new experimental and extreme music communities. I'm interested in exploring how our listening practices and experiences of transgression depend on how we have been taught to listen and hear within the sound worlds that we inhabit. To this end, I'm interested in how people experience contrasting sound worlds and what conditions people to be able to hear differently. Our sonic universes, if we have them, are often so naturalized that moving outside them can evoke strong reactions. So, for instance, sounds that exist outside of our normative sound worlds that we can't immediately identify can often be interpreted as noise, with political, social, and even juridical ramifications. I'm interested in how music making and listening affords us a way of thinking about how we are attuned to situations, and whether challenging musics can help us sit with the discomfort of different situational, socio-political, and ecological situations. Can these musics help us consider how soundscapes shape our life worlds? Or can these sonic decontextualizations and musical reconfigurations help us reevaluate our assumed knowledge, listening, and music-making practices? Atmospheres as a field and literature asks questions regarding intersubjectivity, attunement, affect, and difference in spatial arrangements. Atmospheres have been interpreted as palpable, transpersonal, or pre-personal experiences that have effective force within socio-political settings. Some scholars speak of atmospheres as collective affects comprised by sensations of ambiance, mood, and shared feelings that exist outside of us but impact us in authoritative ways. Yet scholars have pointed to the ambiguity of atmospheric spaces. For instance, Ben Anderson characterizes them as situated between presence and absence, between subject and object, and between the definite and indefinite. I'm particularly interested in how scholars have characterized atmospheres as sites of envelopment, yet comprised of irreducible difference. Atmospheres disclose the unfinished aspects of self and other, the impact of the material world and objects in our midst in shaping atmospheres, and the incapacity to fully account for or intend effective intensities. There's a way that thinking with atmospheres allows the decentering of the subject and intentionality, and permits a study of the emergence of differing experiences within effectively intensive spaces. Often we think of being in an atmosphere, and I think with this project we're more, opening it up to see how atmosphere is being constituted by the assemblages, materials, bodies, human and non-human, environments, and ecologies of a particular space. Excuse me. So with this project, I'd like to ask what thinking with atmospheres allows us to understand about our sonic and musical worlds by decentering the listener-musician dichotomy, to interrogate assumed listening practices, and to de-reify the normative worlds that we inhabit through trained listening practices. In my previous work, transgression meant something more specific about extreme music communities and how they employed sonic, musical, lyrical, and symbolic measures to continually question borders and boundaries, the mainstream, the normative, and the assumed. With this project, transgression is opened up to interrogate musical practices more broadly and to explore how we experience these ruptures of our normative sonic universes, to ask questions about what happens to our listening practices when we are open to these ruptures. I'm hoping that through these sonic events and discussions, participants, myself included, that we can work towards making porous or our normative music making and listening boundaries. Can we train ourselves to be open to the possibilities of these sonic ruptures? In the end, I think listening and musicking practices evoke a politics of recognition even that allows us to interrogate how we listen to others, whose grammar we privilege when hearing, and how understanding reposes upon our capacities to be open to difference. So, with that, I would like to open up the floor to talk with Chantal and Hubert about their music, generally speaking, about this performance. So, as I mentioned, I can begin the conversation with a question about atmospheres in your work. This particular performance I found beautiful. I found it sparse, evocative, and immersive. I felt like I could have, been within the performance for a long time. It was nice. So you both attend to sort of the spatial creation of soundscapes, ambiance, and atmospheres in your music, using techniques such as field recordings and in situ sounds and ambiance in your performances and improvisations. Can you describe a bit more the role of ambience and atmospheres in your music and in your intellectual work, generally speaking? Yeah.
I would say that it's supposed to be open. Oh. Now it's on. Okay. Atmosphere is something that came while I was thinking about my work. I was trying to find a definition, what characterized my work. And suddenly I thought, well, there's a lot of atmosphere. So I started searching on atmosphere in art and atmosphere, sound and atmosphere and sound. And then suddenly I realized that there was quite a bit of work, research being done on the subject. And as I went along, also my work was centered around making sure that the body as a listening body is taken into consideration into the musical performance. And so now when I'm thinking about putting music together, it's more, it has moved from the positioned body, like in a concert hall, more into a situated body, which is that the body is engaged with the environment. And I work at creating a sensitized, do you say sensitized or sensibilisé? Sensitive and space through light, specialization of sounds, and usually have some sound effect also with objects and things like that. So, and usually the setting is not a frontal like we have right now. People could be sitting at the back, at the front, so that everybody has its own story while listening. So from the positioned body to the situated body, and I think that's typical of atmosphere. Because atmosphere is something that it's difficult to pinpoint, but it covers an ambiance. It's something that happens. The other thing also is, I think that through atmosphere, working the space is from listening to listening into. So, or if you take like James Turrell work, he himself feel like his work is from looking to something to looking into something. So you're really involved. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I think that reflecting on the notion of atmosphere is the best way for me to step back from the traditional concert setting and to propose something that engage the body, the listening body, into the whole space.
Yeah. I noticed in your work, Intramuros, that it's the musicians were kind of moving through the space. People were coming in and out. It seemed to be a durational performance as well. So I can see how it was a situated event, and where people could experience it according to their own positionality in the space and time. And thank you.
Yeah. The notion of atmosphere has come from a kind of like attention to the different intensities happening in community, in events lived in common. So as you have presented, I'm mostly interested into the what's happening into like a collective music performance, mostly improvised music, but also what happens in the demonstrations, and mostly like the autonomous demonstrations, which are not bounded by loudspeakers and preformed songs and I try to think transversely between these different type of events to see how sound and music can intensify or can make affects circulate between different components of an assemblage. So I don't know really how the interest in the notion of atmosphere really came. I think that in my opinion, if you pay carefully attention to what happened in these intensive collective events, well, really quickly, you realize that often, the different switches in a situation are related to switches in ambiance, in the atmospheres. And maybe a little, well, my main background is in philosophy. So as we do often in philosophy, we need to precise the concepts we're discussing. So I just want to say a few words on what I mean by ambiance and atmosphere. Well, I use the two concepts mostly as synonyms because they have almost like circular definitions, you know. Maybe atmospheres plays a little bit more with the like physicality of the event, but in my opinion, when you think of like micro events, or let's say relatively small events, ambiance and atmosphere are really connected. And so I was really interested by the work of Jean-Paul Thibault, which is the founder of the Ambiance network. And for him, to put it quickly, an ambiance is a qualitative sensation of context. And what he means by that is it's pretty interesting because a given ambiance is always constituted by so many things, like from the modes of life, the actions of like the subject, but also with like the material infrastructure and the mood induced by so many things. But he says that we always, when we pay attention to an ambiance, it's always something like unitary, like you pay attention to one ambiance. But each time when you try to describe it, like you're always forced to mention a lot of like heterogeneous elements. That it's like if you have that kind of like movement, not necessarily a dialectical movement, but like always that movement between like these particular elements and the feeling, that qualitative sensation of context. But I feel that it's a bit, it's also a bit of a vague definition, and the way I thought of ambiance is that if we say that these are like qualitative sensation of context, this quality, we can like access it, and they can be defined, this quality can be defined through the notion of affective tonality. So I think that an ambiance is characterized by different affective tonalities, and to put it quickly, we can discuss that more later, but I'm really interested in the way that the notion of like affective tonality has been first developed in a more like phenomenological perspective, mostly following the thought of Heidegger. And like one of the recent reader of Heidegger, Peter Sloterdijk, he says that an ambiance is always collective. This, in fact, emerged from an actual community, and this is how, like a collectivity, it open itself to the how of the being in the world. This is how some spaces of proximity, of relation, of shared affects, this is really like the quality of that circulation. And I'll finish by saying that there are some problems with that definition, which are the problems of Heideggerian phenomenology, which is a huge discussion. But I think that, to put it broadly, it's mostly pay too much attention to the human subject and like the speaking and reasoning subject. And so I think that the definition of the affective tone by process philosophy may be not necessarily more interesting, but like we need to expand that phenomenological perspective through the one of process philosophy, which says that an affective tone is the set of sensitive qualities attached to the experience as a whole and differentially to the various elements that compose it. So it's like the subjective form that takes each actual occasion, but also the event in itself. And it connects with the definition of Jean-Paul Thibault. So I think that, I will finish with that. What's really interesting in to defining what is an ambiance is in fact questioning what are the affective tonalities that are characterizing this ambiance as something that we can feel, something unitary in the event. But if we really want to understand what's happening, what is making that ambiance, we have to pay attention to the affective tonalities of all the different elements that come in a kind of interplay between them. So I like that kind of like polyphonic definition of ambiance, which connects with what I'm at some point trying to do in music. Is it like in improvisation or more working also with field recordings and all that?
Amazing. That's really interesting. So ambience for your work kind of discloses something not just ontological, but discloses something about how we are situated within effective universes, and yeah, and how does your music work to sort of explore these kinds of these ontological and epistemological experiences?
Well, one of the first thing is that, and I think that's also something that Chantal does a lot in her work, and well, I don't want to talk for you, but we have many discussion on that, and it's the fact that if we decenter the music creation from the human subject, we also consider that like noises, some like devices, some like plugins or like some sound treatments, they also can have some kind of agentivity, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, I think that I like to consider the ambience of a musical event as the subject creating the music. And when you just like switch a little that attention, in fact, it changed everything, you know? Because and we discussed about that at some point where we were improvising before that performance. We weren't sure exactly who was making that sound.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
some, like in my own practice with all these devices and all that, I like to be surprised by something, and then I'll try to sustain that sound, which I don't know came from what or this. So this is like a broad answer, but you know, it's that kind of like, I don't know, transversality, flexibility, openness to tiny changes in the music creation. So I don't know if it's a bit the same for you, but
for me, I think the space is important also. When you step into the space, I think it was a nice idea that you suggested that we already started the music, so that when people come, there's la notion, le seuil en anglais, the threshold. So the notion of a threshold. So as soon as you step into the space, you're starting to being embodied. That's the idea. And so more and more for me, when I work with the music in performance, where I play and how it's being presented is quite important. And actually, I visited the fourth space a little while ago, and I was not expecting anything, and I quite liked it. This sort of industrial, high-tech space with lighting, and there's all kind of little furniture here and there. I quite like the environment, so I felt good to be playing here. I hope that you feel good being here too. I think there's a nice atmosphere already. You know, we can play with the light more, but it's quite nice. Also, of course, the other thing that's important for me in terms of creating an atmosphere or being in an atmosphere is the sound diffusion. I must say I think that we should not have had the guitar through the PA. It should have been separated because it was a bit tricky for me. I heard too much guitar, and it was
technical debrief.
Yeah, but it's part of how it works as a musician. You're in a new space, so sometimes it's nice we could have had a little residency here for a couple of days to really explore the sound, and that's how usually I like more and more to work, is to have time in the space and to go more into an in situ kind of approach. It's, to me, that's how it works. It doesn't mean that the traditional concert doesn't work. I've been to concert a lot this fall, like Salle Bourgie type of thing, Chapelle, and it's quite nice, but it goes with the music. But for the kind of thing that I want to develop, I like this kind of new space and having a sound system and everything that really create the possibility on an embodiment.
Yeah, this space really affords something different than the traditional concert hall space. I just recently went to a concert with the OSM and with Bell Orchestre, and it was a beautiful concert, but it was interesting in that there was like two very different normative worlds happening. There's the symphonic world, and then there's the sort of indie instrumental rock world, and the entire situation was pretty uncanny because of that. There's the sort of the affective world of the indie rock musician, and how people hold themselves is very different than how people hold themselves in the symphonic universe, and yeah. So I think I think that was sort of an interesting transgression of different sound worlds. But here I felt the sound was quite nice, actually. Like I didn't really. I was thinking there'd be a lot of reverberation, but it was quite nice and also immersive. I think how it was diffused amongst the space was nice. So yeah, there's a few questions that I would like to ask. So maybe I can talk a little bit about improvisation, and maybe this event. So, like prior to this event, you guys hadn't played together before, and you've had, I think, maybe fairly different sort of musical careers so far. But your music was really coherent in the sense that, as you were saying, that sometimes you couldn't really tell which was the guitar or which was from Chantal's work. So how did you find the collaboration? How did you, what sort of techniques did you use to sort of be able to speak together improvisationally and things like that?
1, 2, 3, go.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it. I think one of the thing which is like really important for us. In fact, it's really like music of careful listening, and it can seem obvious, but like honestly, in particular, more like in indie pop, rock, and even like most like let's say popular music, like. Damn, it's really rare that you have like really good listening assemblages with you have that. Anyways, I won't describe that world, but so I really felt that from the beginning we were careful of like really closely listening to what was happening and also paying attention to the texture of sounds. So I think that building an atmosphere, it's more like a slow crafting of textures and like different levels and different like the different rhythms really happen kind of like by themselves, and the at some point the real musical notion of like tonality and rhythm and timbre kind of like blur at some point in the music while we were playing it, and we try to pay attention to the little distinctions in that blurring, but not to come back to these analytics category of musicology just to say, oh, what's happening, how do we feel about that? That's a bit.
Well, I think that the first thing is to know your instrument. So I think you know your instrument, you know your pedals and your things, and I had heard a bit of what you're doing, and I really appreciated it. So I sort of knew a bit what I was I really wanted to explore with the guitar. And for me, to know my instrument means to know my sounds, my bank of sounds, to know how they sound together, separately. I can change the pitch with filters. So it's a lot of working, a lot of practicing, but not practicing like beginning, middle, and end, but practicing the sound so that I know my instrument and also that I feel comfortable in moving all the little buttons and little things that you have on the application. But the other thing I think that works or not is a sense of structure. You need to have a sense of structure, and I think that this you have or you don't. You know, sometimes it goes on, and you know, you need to be able to modulate, you know, to have a little surprise or whatever. It depends what you aim for. I think that we have the same sensibility, and it worked. So
It's interesting because I really agree with you, and at the same time, I imagine that some people who can hear music may hardly find some structures in it, you know.
Oh,
but
that's true.
that's also what
There was a structure.
that's also what I like in play with you.
Yeah, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, creativity often happens with constraint. I find improvisation interesting in that either like it's like you're talking about knowing your instrument well and knowing your sounds and knowing having sort of a good knowledge of what you have on hand. And I find with improvisation that it's in one sense you can sort of improvisation can force one to rely sort of on stocks of knowledge and well-trodden sites of knowledge. Or they can kind of force us to move along the edge of our habits, you know. And did you find that there were points as you were sort of working together that you felt any sort of like rupture from those habits or habitual ways of performing?
Well, on my side, yes, really, because it was the first time that I improvised with electro-acoustic composer, you know, and this is like,
okay, cool.
I mean, like, this is really something, you know, not being able to see what the other musician is like doing, you know, with his or her instrument. That's yeah, something a bit like disturbing, because like even I feel like music creation, we really talk about listening, of course, but it's like it's a fully embodied experience. So like vision and like feeling the sounds of the other are also important. So that was like disruptive on that matter, and the fact that Chantal mixes so many different sounds. But sometimes, and that was a beautiful surprise in our first improv, there are some tiny bits of recorded acoustic instrument, you know, and so that was also disturbing, but like in a good way. Like then suddenly at some point it was like a little roll of a drum happening, and you know, suddenly like 2 or 3 notes of a saxophone, you know, and that's for a musician mostly like trained or having a practice in like really like ensemble, like classic like jazz or rock ensemble. This is like pretty surprising, you know. It's like if someone was showing up in the room suddenly playing 3 notes and after leaving. So, but that was nice. I like that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's neat. In both, if I can continue asking questions, I'm happy to open it up to the audience as well. But there's a few things that I want to talk about and touch on. One is you mentioned textures, and I see that in both of your works. I see sort of a great attention to textures and resonance and vibrational relations between notes and sounds and timbre and things like that. So, for instance, Chantale, in your piece from from there to here, which is, I think, a beautiful, sparse, interesting piece. You used barred chords on a piano with a plank of wood, which in speaking in terms of chords, like places everything within sort of one interval with each other. So it creates this like kind of non-diatonic, but also not super dissonant sound as well. But when you listen to it in good headphones and things like that, you can hear sort of the vibrations between notes in, I think, nice ways. And I see also with Hubert, with your work in Ce qui nous traverse. Yeah, okay, cool. That textures is also a really important part of your process. You're working with overdriven and distorted guitars. You're working with sort of like the crunchiness of cellos and stringed instruments and things like that. Could you talk about how textures are an important part of your work? Or
You want mine?
Texture. Yeah, it's a bit a no-brainer for me working with the computer because I have a possibility of playing 5 sounds together. So it's of course, and because I like, and I like playing with the sans filet, like a sustained note, but also drones. I play with oscillators. So you have all kind of things that amalgamate. Do you say amalgamate?
Mm-hmm.
That's superimposed. And texture. I don't know. Actually, I don't really know. I know that, of course, I work with texture with the computer. And Intramuros was not a textural piece. So it's not always there in my work.
yeah.
Intramuros was actually a work in 3 different spaces at Le Cœur des Sciences. I had l'Agora, la chaufferie, and the chimney. And people could go from one space to the other. In each of the space, there was something happening. But it was very subtle sounding installations. So, but texture is timbre. Maybe timbre is maybe also... Maybe would be the first, and well, it's all important. If you always have just texture, maybe it's nice to play texture and then have a thinner, thing, and then bigger, thicker. Play with this.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump there because I think it's you're mentioning something important. I think when you're trying to improvise in such a way where like it's really like the effective tonalities of the ambiance and the texture of sound that really matters more than like the exact series of notes and all that. There's really like a strong matter. It's important to have some contrast, and it's important to have some like this. Each sound and texture keeps some kind of like singularity, And this is something like I really like noise music, electro-acoustic music, but I think that it's sometimes something that lacks in some practices where either the practice becomes really like only a kind of like big blur wall of sound. I think that can be interesting sometimes, but as a listener, I cannot stay really long in that kind of vibe, And sometimes also the proliferation of like tiny sound events like happening really quickly, and that's also something that I find a bit difficult to be really like taken by. So yeah, that attention to contrast, to be able to. I think that, yeah, like I said before, I like really to approach like texture as like a mixture of like rhythm, tonality, and timbre. You know, I think when there's really an interesting texture and when it's happening as like a subject in an improvisation, the different characteristics of that texture, in fact, for me, don't really matter. It's really more like the kind of like effective switch that it brings into an event that interests me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's something sort of beyond texture that sort of contributes to that, the effective tonality of a situation. Yeah, that's neat. I'm thinking in your work, Intramuros, the tuba and the harmonics of the tuba. So there's that really sort of, there's the really loud and low sense of it, and there's like a bit of the I'm trying to think of words to describe it, but then the harmonics above sort of that low droning sound. I found that, yeah, just to be a really sort of effective, interesting noise and sound.
Maybe I could mention to people, because Matthew refers to some of my piece. You can go on Vimeo and you will have like 5 minutes of presentation of the work, so you have a better idea of what we're talking about. There is a tuba.
Totally. Yeah, that's great. Are there any questions from people in the audience?
And how conducive is that to? Okay, well, this. Now, should you have protested and walked out and said the fourth space is not a place where we should ever perform music?
It's strange, because when we had the sound check, I didn't notice, and I'm usually, maybe because there was a lot of things happening around and I didn't notice, but during the performance I was really troubled, and I didn't know if it was coming from your amp or if it was coming from the ventilation, and also because I was close, I think that there was a lot of sounds being stuck here in that little corner. So it needs to be okay because of the zoom. And so is it good?
Yes.
It's working. And so thank you. Yeah, I could have, I don't know. You know, while you're performing, it's not time to do an esclandre, you know. You just work with the flow and do the best you can.
Right. Because I was wondering about that. You know, I mean, I've been in some beautiful concert halls, the Glenn Gould Studio at the Royal Conservative Music in Toronto, you know, with the wood, and like I can't imagine a worse kind of reflective surface than, you know,
Doug is
cement.
laughing in the back.
yeah, and so, you know, this is where, because it was very ethereal, your music, and you know, transported me in all kinds of ways, but there was that sound. Now, you know, there's a Pauline Olivieros, who I'm sure you're aware of, you know, would say, well, get over it. Okay, would, you know, tune into the white noise. Okay, why are you rejecting it? Why are you being so snobbish?
Yeah.
That's part of the total range of sound. And my feeling is that, you know, the music that you're doing is obviously, in some ways, transgressive. Okay, it's not arranged in notes on scales. Maybe it is, but you know, but it's not what I've been brought up to think of as music. My mother was a piano teacher. Okay, and so I know what music is. And this wasn't music, but was it? Okay, and this is where you know, Matt's point. He's trying to get people like me out of our comfort zone and move, you know, with these kinds of tonalities. But I guess that another question that I had was texture. Chantal, at one point you said, "Oh, timbre," okay, and you expressed it that way. And I'm wondering, because Hubert, you were very articulate about texture, and it seemed like a word you wanted to play with. But again, I'm used to texture as being, something physical, something I can touch, and I'm wondering, is this a metaphorical expression that you're using, or is there a feel to sound?
That's a really interesting question. I think that in the music experience as a musician, but also as a listener, when you feeling a texture is a moment of like, there's the actualization of an effect, and something like happens. Oh, this is like something is like qualified in the experience, and in that really moment of that qualification, of course, it comes from like physical like stimulus, but there's always a more like abstract conceptual dimension, which lands, at the same time when the sound is heard. So I think that like, and it's a good example, like a kind of like white noise coming from a fan or from electricity, in some context can be just like something annoying and all that, but then suddenly if you slowly begin a piece by like the almost exact same white noise, and then you bifurcate from that, and it can create a whole different experience. So I think that having some focus on the physicality of the sound is always important, but like in my opinion, music is never limited to that. There's always that kind of more abstract conceptual dimension, and where texture is more interesting me, it's when you have that real like mixture in the musical experience. In my opinion, this is no metaphor, because these like tiny moments of abstraction of like conceptual activities are happening in every second, every moment in our lives, and they are real. They make some like changes in the world, the way we are touched and what like some physical stimulus evokes into us. This is real. This is not like only like the mirror or the image of something. And to go back to your first question, which I find really interesting, in fact, I don't know if it's because I come more from like a rock background, where like playing in shitty bars is really something like really like normal, but I like to play with like the different conditions of like the space of the performance, and in different like what I often like to do. I haven't done that today, but like I play with lots of like different devices. I really like also to take an object I find in the room and to include that in the performance and all that. Of course, sometimes having like a big white noise is not necessarily the kind, but yeah, as Pauline Oliveros said, well, we have to play with that, and at some point, I even think that it influences us unconsciously, And when I listen to the recording of the performance, maybe I'll notice, and same for you, Chantal, that some of the drones we were making sometimes were kind of like in a kind of like some kind of harmony with like the tones of the white noise and all that. So
white noise or white elephant. There is an elephant in this room.
Yeah.
Excuse me for dominating this kind. I just find it so fascinating. But I like what you're saying about this being beyond metaphor, okay? Because I think that, actually across the humanities, there's a move away from the idea of symbol and interpretation towards ideas of materiality, and certainly, that's what you're addressing. I'm kind of sad because I like symbols. They're mysterious, but everybody's gone over to materiality, so you have to shut up about symbols. But at the same time, Hubert, some of what I heard in your language worried me, and that's because, like, I do sensory studies, which includes sound studies.
Yeah.
And there's a debate within sound studies right now about the idea of music as just vibration. Okay, so that's all it is. It's just vibration, and it's physical. Okay, and I always had a more ethereal conception of what music is, and that idea of music as just vibration, and it may be beyond meaning. Okay, I find it very interesting that you find all kinds of conceptual abstractions. Are you projecting that, or are you finding it in? Are you being symbolic when you say that? Perish the word. Okay, I don't want to accuse you of being retro.
Yeah.
But that seems to me to be different from Brandon LaBelle and some of the other theorists of the affective turn. And the idea of affective intensity, which is just a question, it seems to me, of sound level, and vibration, instead of being, that other quality that is music.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a projection. I think it's if you really pay attention to the experience, it's as I just mentioned before, it's happening all the time. A physical event, can have like so many different like affective effects on people, and this is I really think that of course, if there's no physical vibration, like, well, sound is not necessarily happening. But at the same time, we're also affected by sounds that we cannot hear, like really low sounds have effects on people. Or if we just take the example of the mosquitoes, these devices making like really high frequencies that only young people can hear, and where they place in the metro stations and the different places where they don't want. I mean, most people cannot like really hear it, and even the people who are negatively affected by it cannot consciously hear it, but like they will have that sensation of like they want to leave the room, And one example I like about that, I've been really interested in like the sounds happening in demonstrations and all that. And in London in 2011, during the big demonstrations again, like the austerity measures and all that, some observers were really surprised to see that like sometimes like a riot was happening because suddenly like some people brought loudspeakers and they play like really loud pop music like Rihanna and all that, and then we can question, well, is like Rihanna's music like revolutionary or making people to do the riot? Not necessarily. It's just like that physical stimulus, that like assemblage of physical sound in that context with the background of the people assembled and the energy of the place, it makes switch the ambience, and there was some kind, I don't know, of energy, of rhythmicity, of like shared complicity that made people, they were like more confident or just like wanted to burst all their energy and all that. So in my perspective, it's really an interesting example, because it shows how when in the moment where music touches people and even unconsciously, it's because there's some more conceptual and abstract dimension that kind of like lands on the physical stimulus.
Can I just ask one more, just one last, very brief. There's almost an Oriental quality, Chantal, at times to
Oriental?
Oriental, quality to the plucking sounds that I heard. Are there any Oriental influences in your music?
Not really. There is indeed a show. I don't know if you know the show instruments. It's like the mouth organ. And there was at some point a zither, which indeed is another Asian instrument. But I am very interested in the no theater, which is the Japanese form that I really appreciate. So but I was not expecting this. Maybe I didn't know that it would transparaître, that it would show. So there's nothing beyond it, around it. Like your influences come out even if you don't want to. Not that I'm hiding it, but it's just happened. And some performance, I'm not going to use these sounds. It's just happened that I use them today. But I did go to Japan and Tokyo and really appreciated being there for all kind of reasons. We could talk about it. And
yeah, thank you so much. I was very intrigued by the title of this talk, but also by the statement that was brought up in the beginning, as well as the background that that one of the performers right today has in terms of collectivity and manifestation, well, in protest. So I have two questions. One question is, and it's about the same, like the positionality between the listener and also the positionality of the person who performs, the musician. So the first kind of position is like transgressiveness. I think it has to do a lot with who is performing and what is the audience, what is the context of this, because to me, for example, coming from Chicago, noise music, for me, it's not transgressive anymore to see someone playing noise, a white guy playing noise with a laptop, right? It stopped to be transgressive to me so long ago. So, but right now, maybe for somebody else it is, and maybe in the context where this play, but to me, something transgressive will be maybe playing something unexpected or from the positionality of someone who is really like breaking through many stigmas and many stereotypes. So in this case, but also, and I wonder in terms of the situation to be in a protest, what is transgressive? Because you can even say that politically speaking, there is so many ways of transgressing, right? Like this transgression in the public space with sound. So this is one point that I've been thinking through this time, and then on the other hand, the listener who might be very affected by atmospheres who trigger memories that are related to trauma or they are related to moments of political even inclusion or even like euphoria. And in this case, how do you deal with those soundscapes that you are like bringing from the exterior and then bringing into an interior, right, and a context in a concert when, of course, you don't know who is the audience, but the audience will navigate through and will have their own atmosphere or their own experience, right? So I think that's the double edge as well to working with atmospheres and in soundscapes is that it has a political also own life. And so how do you translate that into a space and a performance within a diverse audience, right? Where I'm like ideally thinking there is like a diversity in the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really great question. Yeah, I agree. I think that transgression in this context is pretty ambiguous. I think a lot of the musics that we experience and know about actually is not super transgressive in a lot of ways, like extreme metal. I don't find terribly transgressive as such. I think it's, you know, like they're as a genre, and within the genre, it can be quite conservative even. So, which leads to, you know, an infinite sort of splintering into other genres because of, you know, when one genre is routinized and sedimented, then you really can't sort of like go outside of it to bring other noises in. And I guess one reason why kind of stuck with this, the title of Transgression for this project is kind of that ambiguity, kind of questioning transgression as well. Thinking of it as something that's not a thing as such, but is contextual, situational, positioned, and so I think, yeah. So I think, trying to think of how else to respond to that. I guess now I'm starting to think of these transgression in terms of, broadly speaking, these ruptures, these experience of ruptures within sort of normative soundscapes. So one thing that I'm thinking of recently, since I've come to Montreal, I've kind of become a lot more aware of the noise of the urban landscape. Montreal's loud, generally speaking.
Well, especially around here, there's a lot of construction.
Yeah, construction constantly. One of the experiences that I've had recently is we had a child last year, and so I spent the entire year going on long 2-hour walks with her, kind of attached to me, and finding out that actually the routes that I took every day really depended on sort of the soundscapes that I experienced. So, you know, I really like walking along the tracks in the Mile End. And so I had spent a lot of time there, but recognizing like, oh yeah, there's just all these sort of rupturing sounds that I just feel like kind of protective about. So I'm like, and kind of getting angry at like all these sort of like non-embodied sounds I'm you know, experiencing in different ways. And then like going through Park Jerry and all the hockey and the puck snaps against the boards and things like that. I'm like, you know, trying to be protective or something. But and so I think like so I think in terms of I find transgression this sort of ambiguous term that needs to be critiqued, I think, in a lot of ways. I think particularly for the, you know, like the political and you know, the political implications of that. And so I guess now I'm kind of thinking more in terms of how spaces are rupturing and how that sort of discloses things about our listening experiences and things about how we're attuned to situations in particular ways. So like I think our standpoints, our previous experiences, how we're taught to listen, all these things sort of factor into what we can maybe experience in moments of rupture or transgression.
Yes, in fact, I think that like the notion of transgression is in itself like really like, yeah, ambiguous and like polysemic, and that's what I like into it. And as a common friend and inspirator has said, Sandeep Bhagwati, you know, like art is a play with ambiguity. You know, that's what we're doing. So I think that a sound cannot be like transgressive in all the potential meanings. So that performance in what was it transgressive? Well, I think that there's, as Matthew you mentioned, there's always like also relation to context, and like that kind of music being at like some kind of like loud volume in that part of town and that moment in the day, like projected outside into the loudspeaker and that kind. There's something transgressive in itself. Oh, it's not a huge transgression, but like this like transgression per definition is just like a crossing of borders, you know. So some like
Doing something unusual.
yeah, some social and temporal like borders or habits have been moved, I believe, with that kind of performance. And on another other level, and one also that I think that in the music that Chantal and I are doing, and well, a lot of people are into that perspective too. I think we try to play with different regimes of perception, you know, between like clear, distinguishable events that we can analyze and like sequence, and suddenly something really more broad, atmospheric, and all that. And well, this is a huge question, and why to play between these registers of I think there's a political potential too, and like I really like the way that Matthew has put it, and in the future of that research creation project, that's really something that I would like us to develop. I strongly think that music and arts in general can help us collectively to navigate between different regimes of perception, to welcome difference, to maybe see and like perceive something that might have disrupted us, and to question that and to be open to that. And this, in my opinion, has strong political implications in our times where like the borders and the boundaries between people, states, between like identities, between our raising everywhere, like bringing like some art forms, some like sonic events that may like cross these boundaries, and trying to connect, to switch the relations of power, to I think that's something interesting. And I think there are many other potential meanings of like transgressive sounds that can be developed, and like I haven't thought of the ones like you were bringing, also like just like the social and identitarian positionality of a person and performing in such a space. That's another level also of transgression, you know. And this is so yes, I think it's really like a really open field, and in my opinion really inspirational field of thinking and of creation. And on the political dimension of soundscapes, well, I'm not sure I got your question pretty well, but like I feel that that's something in the work. The main piece I was working on like in the last 2 years was like that, using the soundscape of demonstrations as a sound score, and so musicians were improvising live with them. And at some moment, there's a movement in the piece where you can, well, what's more prominent is like the sound of like the riot police attacking the people, you know. And having been myself, well, a victim of police brutality many times, I can understand how these sounds can trigger some like difficult feeling, and that's, I think, an important conversation. And I don't think that what I'm going to say is like is true for every situation, but in that kind of situation where there are some codes of actual music and all that, I think that there's some kind of like shock effect that is really important. And I think that it's also one of the modalities how music and art are like transgressing our cultural and social habits, you know. But the question you bring, if I understand whether this question is also important, there's some kind also of care and ethic when you play with that. And actually I'm not really good at it, so maybe I should also think more about that dimension. Like shocking, yes, but with what consequence to who and
Adding to Amanda's question, actually, I want to ask a question too. So I was thinking of, yeah, those sounds can definitely trigger some people, but also I feel like I'm quite concerned actually about that. While using these kind of sounds, the sounds of demonstrations, I feel like sometimes we do carry the potential of romanticizing these demonstrations as well. So how, as an artist, what kind of techniques you're using to deal with this very situation? Because then it loses its political meaning, I feel like, when you romanticize something. I'm not specifically saying that you're doing that, but it's a general danger, I feel like. What do you think about that? Thank you.
I totally agree, and I was like really afraid of that. And I try to approach these sounds not as like in a representational approach, not like to make feel the listener as if he or she was in a demo, or to make feel some like good memories to people who were in demonstrations. The main concept of the piece was to use these sounds as like, a score for collective improvisations. And at some point in the album that's going to be released in the year to come, I wonder if sometimes even I will maybe like lower the sound of the demonstrations to only keep one of the musicians to like highlight that kind of like more like orientative dimension more than like the symbolic significance of that sound. But it's always a risk, and even if I really tried not to fall into that trap, maybe someone will go out of the room and saying, oh well, that was like romanticization of, you don't control the effects of your creations. But that's really something which is important, and I think, well, yeah, your question points really a limit of that project. Yeah.
Nice excuse that is. They're not responsible for anybody who has the listener who makes it. Did you find that to be a sidestepping of the very interesting idea of responsibility that you were putting on the table? That you're responsible for these sounds, and if you're romanticizing them, there's something wrong about that. I'm quite astonished and intrigued, by this idea of people being responsible. It's like an ethics, okay, not just aesthetics, where beauty, is an excuse for anything goes, and even if it's not very beautiful, it's still, that's aesthetics. And then an ethics, which you're both bringing in, is a very interesting way of resisting that. Okay, and I'm interested in that idea that we were over the idea of authorial intent. Okay, that you can control how people listen to your music. You can't. Okay, that we're all going to take from it whatever we do. But is that a sort of, it gives you a carte blanche? Now you're being very responsible in what you're saying, but is that part of it? That it then gives you a carte blanche where I can't be responsible for how people react because I don't have any control over that. It's up to them. And I'm actually giving agency to the listeners by acknowledging that.
Well, that's really an important point, and no, in my opinion, there's no carte blanche given. I think that these like sounds of demonstrations are lacking actually in Montreal, in my opinion. I think that the city is not going pretty well. It's not going pretty well. There are so many things that might be changed, and well, that's one of the. So I don't think it was like to like say through music, these sounds are important. There is something happening there, and maybe that like trying to play with that in a musical. In my opinion, there's some kind of responsibility saying like this is interesting, and like some of the best moments of our collective lives are happening there. Please pay attention to that, and we're going to make music with that. Is it a romanticization? That's a huge question, but yes, I think that no, even if there's no direct effect between like our creations and what the public will feel, there is some kind of responsibilities. This is not an absolute responsibility, but there is some kind of way, yeah.
Yeah, those are fascinating conversations. I know many sort of experimental musics and sound arts, electronic musics, they take sounds from from other places and they import them to either transpose into sort of, I think what you're doing, but there's also a sort of reconfiguration that happens in the process. Like those sounds kind of become uncanny in some ways. So they're reconfigured according to maybe sort of the affective world of the author as well. I guess that's kind of a question that I had, is how the sort of environmental objects and objects of perception that we experience in our world, how they impact your music and your music too, because I think in your music there's always a sort of spatial reconfiguration of these sounds.
I was just wondering if through your work, I mean, we were talking about affective tonality, and actually, as an artist, that's what I would be interested in, is I hear these sounds of manifestation, and how do I translate it into music? I mean, what is the effect that I can bring into the music without making it obvious that it is people shouting and claiming, clamer des choses, réclamer, revendicate. So it's whole question, because I think that art as such is a political right from the start.
Yeah.
There's no way around it. We don't create out of space and out of context. We're always situated into a social. But how do we work this notion that art is politic? We don't need to underline it, but we need to go and grasp the affective tonality, and I think that's a big challenge.
Well, I'm pretty glad that you mentioned that, because like that's exactly what I tried, and I insist on the try, to do with that piece. In like each different movement, I really tried to the piece is built on 8 different movements. There's no like temporal like continuity. It's really like some like more like tableau or different like movements, and I tried for each movement to really focus on the affective tone of that event, with all the tiny affective tones of some sound events happening, but you know, that was like my main focus, you know. And often when you try to describe like an affective tonality, it's art that you can like describe it only by a word, you know. It's only like, it's more often like a kind of multiplicity, like some like affectionality of fear, anger, and like speed, you know. This is something that you can feel at some moment.
And then you don't necessarily want to fall into description.
Exactly.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's the non-representational
You really
approach.
want to grasp the essence
Yeah.
of things and make an atmosphere out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there a way that in your music that you try to avoid like non-referential, or like you try to avoid
that's what I wanted to say.
referentiality?
Yeah.
But can I just jump in
Si,
again?
si.
You know, like music is already non-representational. You know, that's why abstract art in the form of painting aspired to the condition of music. Okay, it saw music as a model.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
It's not true. It's not true.
But it's not representational, but it can be referential. Like there's a lot of this, like le poème symphonique, and there's a lot of narration in a lot of music and popular music. It's a story that's being, and it's fine, but it depends. Well, I'm talking from because I think music can represent a lot of things.
A lot of people, a lot of theorists just think it represents emotions, or it mobilizes emotions. I think that's pretty boring as an idea. You know, I think that there's more going on with music than that. But Chantale, can I ask you, you know, you professed to care for the listener, okay? You said, you know, from the positioned body to the situated body, and that you wanted to, you know, in a way reach out to the listener. But if you were truly to live up to your words, okay, then you would be like Glenn Gould. And Glenn Gould, okay, did these recordings. He didn't perform live. He wasn't into live performances. And his idea was that through the recordings that could be put in people's hands, they could, with their hi-fi, turn up the treble or turn it down, turn up the bass, turn it down. They could make the music themselves. And he thought this would be tremendously empowering. And he was in the early days of hi-fi and 50s and 60s when this kind of idea was there. So, that would turn the agency, he thought, obviously he's dictating the tempo, because it's not actually the speed of the record, the LP, that you're adjusting, just the sound volume. But this was his understanding. So what do you mean, okay, when you say you're being solicitous of our bodies as an audience?
Well, I think that there's many ways of proposing listening situation to people. I think Glenn Gould's proposal was very interesting, especially at the time that he was doing what he was doing. But also, as he was thinking that people could turn it down or put more treble or more bass, actually when I'm doing a production, people can move around. People can change chair. People can walk. I'm trying to propose an environment that encourage. I don't tell people they have to do it, but that's why I spend a lot of time in the room usually before I present the thing, because I think the best way so that people can feel comfortable in moving around and changing chair, like, oh, I've got weird frequencies here. So maybe if I go and sit there, I'll have a better listening experience. So this is what I propose, so that the people can move their body in the space. And if they just find where they are, they just stay where they are. So that's what I propose now. I don't believe in the sweet spot.
Okay.
Because we would be just one person in a room to listen to the music, or we would just all be piled up to have the best.
A pyramid
Yeah.
of people to try and get that.
Yeah.
So do you take a lot of care with the positioning of speakers? Gould was very concerned about where microphones were placed, and he had his technicians place them all over the place, in the piano and outside the piano, and in the mixing afterwards, would splice. So there's no original recording of a Gould. They're all double, triple, quadruple takes that have been spliced together. So, was there a lot of thought that went into where these speakers are placed, or?
Not really.
No. Well, it's this fourth space. It's so inimical
We
to any
should
kind of
have
aesthetic
had 4
experience.
speakers. There's a lot. We need to do another one and have a rethink about the
Interesting.
experience.
I think there's a question, probably last question there.
Thank you. I was thinking we were talking a lot actually about, speaking of atmospheres, and I really like Hubert when you talked about the phenomenology, how it can be limiting by just reducing it to the human body only.
Yeah.
I really like the idea, and also Riedel says that we need to think with atmospheres, but we should also go beyond atmospheres. So I was thinking of, and also listening to you, kind of breaking the patterns of audience, composer, and these kind of things. I was thinking of how can we go beyond Western musical terminologies with your works? Because, for instance, as far as I remember, Hubert, you briefly mentioned about polyphony, right?
Yeah.
The word polyphony actually reminds me of a lot of hierarchies. So I was thinking of, speaking of atmospheres and going beyond atmospheres, how can we go beyond Western terminologies of music with your music? Thank you.
Well, that's really, really hard, because that's what we're made of, and
Same with me as well.
Yes, but with a lot of humility, I think that, for example, the definition of texture I was trying to bring was with a lot of humility what I was maybe like trying to do, and that attention. For instance, like I have no music classical training, and I think this is like, in my opinion, I think this is like more force than a limit, because it's really rare that, like, Chantale may be an exception, but like a lot of people I improvise with, if they have like a real classical training, they're really limited, you know, and and so my approach to music and the instrument is really more, well, in my opinion, this is like really different. So I'm not trying to say that everybody should do that. It's just like in my musical practice, I've been trying to just the fact that, like, making music since more than 20 years now, and like continuing and not being like intimidated with these codes and all that, and saying, no, I mean, like, I'm doing weird sound of my guitar with a lot of effects. That's music too. And if it doesn't goes in your little box as well, that's your problem. I think that there's a lot of other like strategies to be like thought of, but yes, I think that maybe with that research creation project, that's also a bit what we're trying to do, like to focusing mostly on atmospheres and to really like think them as we described, more like on their affective levels, the thing really ungraspable. I think it really goes beyond a lot of like the Western musicology and an important part of the Western philosophy too, at some point.
Can I just say a word about the Sensing Atmospheres project? I'll be very brief. Extreme Musics is one component of it. Matt is the principal investigator. This is just a grant application so far. We hope it might get funded. But we also look forward to transforming this space, fourth space, in a number of other ways in future. And as a taste of things to come, one of the people in the project is into color therapy. And so just imagine this room, okay, no longer the black and white, but suffused with all kinds of colors that would actually have an effect on your well-being. We're also, and the controllers of the space don't know this yet, we're going to be staging a thunderstorm and a sort of a hurricane force event, if we get our way as well, to actually immerse people in a true atmosphere, which is the atmosphere off the east coast of the US. So we're really we have a lot of plans for this space, okay? And we're going to rock it. We are really going to rock it. This was just the beginning, okay, of the ways in which we are going to make this space into an immersive environment that will engage all your senses and hopefully lead to just the kinds of epiphanies that we've had this afternoon. If I can just say, as a member of the Sensing Atmospheres project, thank you so much, for your reflections on this. It's been very stimulating for me, given my very primitive understanding of music, to explore, the things that you've put on the table.
Well, thank you for being there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, 4:52, how are you guys feeling?
I'm done.
You're done? Okay. Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you so much. That was a really excellent conversation. Thank you for the questions. Those were really brilliant questions. And thank you for your performance. I think that was a really enriching and thoughtful experience.
Maybe just mentioning that we hope to build a small reading group around these notions. So if you're interested, I imagine they can communicate with Sisk or with you, Matthew,
Yeah,
or
with me and the Sensing Atmospheres working group.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're speaking about like beginning in January. So if you want to continue that conversation, or if people online want to join us in future events, there's at least that option. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Great.
Merci, Mathieu.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Round of applause? Yeah, let's do it. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Well, Matthew, first of all, for bringing this project to us. And we so much appreciated the reflection on being in the space and doing a mini residency and talking about the lighting, Chantal. I knew you would do it. We are, of course, forever looking for further experimentation and working with the space to develop exciting projects. So thank you so much for your enthusiasm and joining us on this journey. And Hubert and Chantal, it's been just so wonderful to meet you and hope to have you back in here. Thanks for being patient with us, I would say. For everybody who came in person, so great to see you here, so great to connect in this way. And for those of you who joined us online, thanks so much for your patience and being here with us as well. I say patience because I forcefully muted some of your videos at the start, so sorry about that, but I didn't see any inklings for jumping back in. Anyhow, we appreciate you being here. So on that note, folks, we're going to wish you a very good Thursday evening. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good night. Bye. Take care.